The clock had just struck 11 at night when Tasha Johnson finally closed her laptop. She rubbed her tired eyes and looked around the empty law office. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, but she had stayed behind to finish preparing for tomorrow's big case. That was just how she worked, always giving her all, never cutting corners. The downtown streets were quiet as Tasha walked to her car in the parking garage. The summer night air felt warm against her skin, a nice change from the freezing air, conditioning she'd been sitting in all day. As she drove through the city, she thought about her mother's birthday coming up on the weekend. She still needed to pick up that cookbook her mom had been hinting about for months. Tasha didn't notice the police car until its lights suddenly flashed in her rearview mirror. She checked her speed. She was going exactly the limit. Maybe a taillight was out. She signaled and pulled over carefully, stopping under a bright street lamp. She could see the houses on either side of the quiet suburban street, some with lights still on despite the late hour. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. Just a routine stop. Tasha did what she always told her younger brothers to do if they were ever pulled over. She turned off the engine, placed her hands where they could be seen on the steering wheel, and waited. Through her side mirror, she watched an officer approach. He walked with a stiff stride, one hand resting near his holster. Something about his body language made her stomach tighten. The officer tapped on her window with his flashlight. Tasha pressed the button to lower it. "License and registration," the officer demanded without greeting her or explaining why he'd pulled her over. His nameplate read Officer Reynolds. His face looked stern under the brim of his hat, his mouth set in a hard line. "Good evening, officer," Tasha said politely. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" "I said license and registration," Officer Reynolds repeated, his voice sharper now. "I'm happy to provide those," Tasha replied, maintaining her composure. "But I would like to know the reason for the stop, please." The officer's face hardened. "Step out of the vehicle." Tasha felt her heart rate pick up. Something wasn't right about this. "Officer, I don't understand why I need to exit my vehicle. I haven't broken any traffic laws that I'm aware of." "Out. Now." His hand moved to rest on his belt. Tasha knew her rights. "I respectfully decline to exit the vehicle unless you can. Tell me the reason for this stop. Am I being detained, and if so, on what grounds?" Officer Reynolds leaned closer to the window, his face now inches from hers. "You people always think you know the law better than those who enforce it." The words, "you people," hung in the air between them. Tasha felt a chill despite the warm night. "I'm reaching for my phone to record this interaction," she said clearly, moving her right hand slowly toward her purse on the passenger seat. "For both our—" It happened so fast. Officer Reynolds' arm shot through the open window. His open palm connected with the side of Tasha's face with a loud crack. The force knocked her head against the headrest and sent her phone flying from her hand onto the floor of the car. For a moment, everything went silent. Tasha's cheek burned. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard gasps. Across the street, a couple had frozen on the sidewalk, the woman's hand covering her mouth in shock. The man already had his phone out, pointing it in their direction. "Did you just—" Tasha started, her voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. She touched her face gently, feeling the heat where his hand had struck her. "Exit the vehicle, now or I will remove you myself," Officer Reynolds growled, seemingly unaware or unconcerned about the witnesses across the street. Tasha's mind raced. Years of handling tense courtroom situations had taught her how to think clearly under pressure. She knew that what happened next would determine everything. If she lost her composure, showed anger, justified as it might be, things could escalate dangerously. But if she could keep her wits about her, she might be able to turn this around. From the corner of her eye, Tasha could see more people gathering. Someone else had their phone out now, too. Good. Witnesses. Documentation. These would be crucial later. The officer reached for the door handle. This was a critical moment, and Tasha made a decision. Instead of arguing further, she would redirect this situation using the tools she knew best, words and the law. "Officer Reynolds," she said clearly, loud enough for the bystanders to hear. "I want to state for the record that at 11:24 p.m. on June 15th, you struck me across the face during a traffic stop without provocation. I have not been informed of why I was pulled over, nor have I been told that I am under arrest. I am an attorney and I am fully aware of my rights in this situation." Officer Reynolds paused, his hand still on the door handle. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, that she knew his name, or that she was responding with such specific legal language instead of fear or outrage. "You just assaulted a citizen while in uniform," Tasha continued, her voice growing stronger. "There are at least 3 witnesses filming this interaction. I am going to reach down, slowly, to retrieve my phone from the floor of my vehicle so that I can also document what happens next." As she carefully leaned down to find her phone, she noticed 2 things: more police lights reflecting in her mirrors, and Officer Reynolds taking a step back from her car. Someone must have called for backup. This could either help her situation or make it worse, depending on who showed up. Tasha found her phone and picked it up. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. She opened the camera app and began recording, making sure to capture Officer Reynolds standing by her car. What happens in the next few minutes, she thought to herself as she heard car doors slamming behind her, will change everything. She took a deep breath, steadied, her hand holding the phone, and prepared to face whatever came next. The sting from the slap still burned on Tasha's cheek, but something else was burning brighter: her resolve. Her hand trembled slightly as she held her cracked phone, but her voice remained steady as she continued recording. "This is Tasha Johnson, at the intersection of Maple and 4th Street. It's 11:27 p.m. on June 15th. I've just been physically assaulted by Officer Reynolds during what appears to be a routine traffic stop. I have not been informed of why I was pulled over." She could see more police cars pulling up behind her in the rearview mirror. Red and blue lights painted the street in alternating colors, creating an almost surreal scene. Nearby porch lights began turning on as neighbors came out to see what was happening on their usually quiet street. "I am requesting Officer Reynolds' badge number and the name of his supervising officer," Tasha continued, keeping her voice clear and controlled. Her law firm specialized in civil cases, not criminal ones, but years of handling tough courtroom situations had taught her that documentation was everything. Right now, every word and every action needed to be recorded. Officer Reynolds glared at her through the window but said nothing. His hand still rested on his holster, a fact Tasha made sure to mention aloud for the video. "The officer is refusing to provide his badge number and appears to be in a threatening stance with his hand near his weapon," she narrated. "I have not made any threatening movements. My seatbelt is still fastened, and my car is turned off." 2 more officers approached from behind. One was tall with gray hair showing at his temples, clearly older and more experienced than Reynolds. The second officer was a woman with short brown hair who hung back slightly, surveying the scene with cautious eyes. "Evening," the older officer said, nodding to Reynolds before looking at Tasha through her window. "I'm Sergeant Chen. What seems to be the problem here?" Before Reynolds could speak, Tasha addressed the sergeant directly. "Sergeant Chen, I'd like to report an assault by Officer Reynolds. I was pulled over without explanation, and when I reached for my phone to record the interaction, he struck me across the face." She turned her cheek toward the window light to show the red mark that was already beginning to swell. Sergeant Chen's expression remained professional, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he looked from the mark on Tasha's face to Officer Reynolds. "That's not what happened," Reynolds said quickly. She was non-compliant and made a sudden movement. "I have witnesses," Tasha replied calmly, gesturing toward the small group of people gathered across the street, many with phones out. "And I believe your dash cam and body camera should have captured the entire interaction." At the mention of cameras, something flickered across Officer Reynolds' face. Concern, perhaps, or the realization that this situation was quickly spiraling, beyond his control. Sergeant Chen seemed to pick up on this too. "Reynolds, step back to your vehicle," he instructed. Then, turning to Tasha, "Ma'am, I'd like to hear your version of events." As Reynolds reluctantly stepped away, Tasha recounted exactly what had happened, from being pulled over without explanation, to the officer's aggressive behavior and the slap. She kept her tone factual rather than emotional, like she was presenting evidence to a jury. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," she concluded, "and I want it noted that I believe I was profiled and that Officer Reynolds used excessive force." In the eye, female officer, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "I'm Officer Rivera. Would you like medical attention, ma'am? That mark looks like it might swell badly." Tasha touched her cheek again. "Yes, I would like that documented, but I'll see my own doctor after we're done here." Officer Rivera nodded and made a note on her small notepad. Tasha noticed she was also wearing a body camera with its red light blinking, more evidence being recorded. By now, a small crowd had gathered at a distance. Someone from across the street called out, "We saw the whole thing. We got it on video." Sergeant Chen looked uncomfortable. He glanced at the gathering crowd, then back at Tasha's calm, professional demeanor, and seemed to make a decision. "Ms. Johnson will need to take statements from you and the witnesses. Officer Rivera will handle that. I'm going to speak with Officer Reynolds." "Before you go," Tasha said, "I'd like to know why I was pulled over in the first place." Sergeant Chen hesitated, then checked the computer in his patrol car. After a moment, he returned. "There's no call or complaint registered. Officer Reynolds was on routine patrol." The implication was clear. There had been no legitimate reason for the stop. As Sergeant Chen walked away to speak with Reynolds, Tasha took a deep breath. Her legal training told her this was a critical moment. What happened in the next few minutes could determine whether justice would be served, or if this would become yet another incident swept under the rug. Officer Rivera approached Tasha's window again. "Would you feel more comfortable stepping out of the vehicle now to give your statement? I'll stand with you." Tasha considered this. The situation had shifted. With Sergeant Chen aware of what had happened and witnesses backing her account, the immediate danger had passed. Still, she remained cautious. "Yes, but I'll continue recording if that's all right," she replied, unbuckling her seatbelt. "You're right," Officer Rivera confirmed. As Tasha carefully stepped out of her car, she noticed Reynolds watching her from a distance, his face a mix of anger and something else. Worry, perhaps. Sergeant Chen was speaking into his radio, likely calling for a supervisor. A middle-aged couple crossed the street and approached Officer Rivera. "We saw everything," the woman said. "We have it all on video." The way that officer treated her was completely unacceptable. "Thank you," Tasha said to them. "Could I get your contact information? Your witness statement will be important." As they exchanged information, more patrol cars arrived. An older officer with captain's bars on his uniform stepped out of one of them. Tasha recognized him from community meetings. Captain Walsh, head of this precinct. Officer Rivera looked concerned. "This is getting serious," she said quietly. "It was serious the moment he put his hands on me," Tasha replied, straightening her jacket. Despite the late hour and the circumstances, she looked composed and professional, every inch the attorney she was. Captain Walsh surveyed the scene, the gathering witnesses, the officers, and Tasha standing tall despite the mark on her face, and started walking toward them. Tasha checked that her phone was still recording. The next few minutes would be crucial. She had been wronged, but now she had an opportunity to turn this incident into something meaningful. Her mind was already collecting facts, organizing them into a case that would be irrefutable. As Captain Walsh approached, Tasha prepared herself. She wasn't just fighting for herself tonight. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever been afraid to speak up. And she had no intention of backing down. Captain Walsh stopped a few feet away from Tasha, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. His gaze moved from the red mark on her face to the cracked phone in her hand, then to the small crowd of witnesses and back to Officer Reynolds, who stood stiffly by his patrol car. "Ms. Johnson," he said, recognizing her from community meetings where she had spoken about local legal aid programs. "I understand there's been an incident." "That's putting it mildly, Captain," Tasha replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. still coursing through her system. "I'd like 4 minutes of your time to explain exactly what happened and what needs to happen next." The captain checked his watch and nodded. "You have my full attention." Tasha took a deep breath. This was the moment that mattered, the moment to turn an act of injustice into a catalyst for change. She had spent years representing clients who faced discrimination and abuse of power. Now she was living it herself, and she knew exactly what to do. "At approximately 11:22 p.m. tonight," she began, "I was pulled over by Officer Reynolds without being given any reason. When I respectfully asked why I had been stopped, he became aggressive and ordered me out of my vehicle without explanation." A few feet away, Officer Rivera was taking notes. Sergeant Chen stood with arms crossed, listening intently. The small crowd of witnesses had grown quieter, straining to hear Tasha's words. "When I reached for my phone to record the interaction, a legal right protected by the First Amendment, Officer Reynolds reached through my window and struck me across the face." Tasha turned her cheek toward the light again, making sure everyone could see the mark that was now visibly swelling. Captain Walsh's expression darkened. "Ms. Johnson, these are serious allegations." "They are serious facts, Captain," Tasha corrected him firmly. "Facts witnessed by at least 5 bystanders and hopefully captured by Officer Reynolds' body camera and dash cam, assuming they were operational and not conveniently turned off." Officer Reynolds shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Tasha continued, her voice growing stronger. "Under Title 42, Section 1983 of the U.S. Code, citizens have the right to sue state officials who violate their civil rights while acting under color of law. What happened tonight was not just assault. It was a civil rights violation." She gestured toward her car. "I was lawfully operating my vehicle. I have not been told of any traffic violation. I was compliant but simply exercising my right to know why I was being detained. Nothing in that scenario justifies the use of force, especially not a strike to the face." The confidence in her tone made several officers exchange glances. Captain Walsh's posture had changed slightly. He was no longer just managing an incident. He was calculating potential liability. "Department policy requires officers to identify themselves and state the reason for a stop," Tasha continued. "Policy also explicitly prohibits the use of physical force against non-threatening civilians. Officer Reynolds violated both of these policies, along with my constitutional rights against unreasonable search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she took a step closer to Captain Walsh. "I'm not interested in sensationalizing this incident," she said, her voice softer but still carrying to everyone listening. "What I am interested in is accountability and reform. I practice law in this community. I represent people from all walks of life who come through your precinct. What happened tonight is unfortunately not unique. It's just rarely witnessed by so many people or happened to someone who knows their rights." Officer Reynolds finally spoke up. "Captain, she's making this into something it's not. She was—" Captain Walsh held up his hand, silencing him without even looking in his direction. His attention remained fixed on Tasha. "I practice civil rights law," Tasha continued. "I know that law enforcement has a difficult job. I also know that with authority comes responsibility. When that responsibility is betrayed, the trust between police and the community they serve breaks down." She glanced at her phone, still recording. "We're now 3 minutes into my 4 minutes, so let me be clear about what happens next. I will be filing a formal complaint against Officer Reynolds tonight. I will be requesting all body camera footage, dash cam footage, and dispatch records related to this stop. I will be seeking medical documentation of my injuries." The captain nodded slowly. "That's your right. Additionally," Tasha went on, "I'll be requesting an immediate internal affairs investigation. If the department doesn't take appropriate action, I will pursue federal civil rights charges and a civil lawsuit. Not for personal gain, but to ensure this doesn't happen to someone else who might not have the same resources or knowledge that I do." She looked directly at Officer Reynolds now. Someone who might react out of fear or anger when slapped by an officer and end up in a much worse situation. The weight of her words hung in the night air. Several onlookers nodded in agreement. "Your 4 minutes are almost up," Captain Walsh said quietly. What else would you like to say? Tasha looked around at the gathering, neighbors in pajamas and robes. The witnesses with their phones still recording. The officers with varying expressions, some uncomfortable, some concerned. Rivera looking almost impressed. What I want, Tasha said finally, is for this incident to matter, for it to lead to real changes in how officers in this department interact with citizens, for Officer Reynolds to face appropriate consequences that send a message about accountability, and for everyone here tonight to remember that the badge is meant to represent protection and service, not power and fear. She pointed to the growing bruise on her face. This mark will heal in a few days, but the damage to community trust takes much longer to repair. You have an opportunity right now, Captain, to show everyone watching that this department takes these issues seriously. Captain Walsh was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Sergeant Chen. I want Officer Reynolds' badge and gun. He's on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending investigation. A murmur went through the crowd. Officer Reynolds' face, flushed with anger and disbelief. Captain, you can't. I can and I am, Captain Walsh cut him off. Ms. Johnson is right about one thing for certain. How we handle this tonight matters. He turned back to Tasha. We'll take your full statement. I'll personally ensure all footage is preserved. And I give you my word that this will be investigated thoroughly. Tasha nodded, allowing herself to exhale slowly. Her 4 minutes had made a difference. It wasn't a complete victory. That would take time and follow through. But it was a start. As Officer Rivera approached with forms for her statement, Tasha caught the eye of the couple who had first witnessed the incident. They gave her small nods of respect and support. Somewhere in the crowd, someone started a quiet round of applause that quickly spread. For the first time since being pulled over, Tasha felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She had stood her ground. She had turned an injustice into a moment of truth. And she wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. The crowd had grown considerably in the last 15 minutes. Neighbors who had come out in robes and slippers now stood in small groups, talking in hushed voices. A local news van had somehow already arrived, its reporter standing at the edge of the police tape that now surrounded the scene. Tasha sat in the back of an ambulance holding an ice pack to her cheek as a paramedic checked her blood pressure. She had insisted on medical documentation of her injury before giving her official statement. Every detail mattered. Blood pressure's a bit elevated, but that's to be expected given the circumstances, the paramedic said kindly. Any dizziness or blurred vision after the impact? No, Tasha replied. Just some pain and swelling. She lowered the ice pack to show him the bruise that was now clearly visible. The paramedic took a photo with a medical camera. For your records, he explained. This is standard procedure for documenting injuries. Tasha nodded gratefully. Another piece of evidence secured. Across the street, she could see Officer Reynolds sitting in a patrol car, no longer wearing his badge or gun belt. His face was a mask of anger as he watched Sergeant Chen talking to the witnesses. This wasn't how he had expected his night to go. This wasn't how stops like this usually ended. Captain Walsh approached the ambulance, clipboard in hand. Ms. Johnson, how are you feeling? Like someone who was struck in the face by a police officer, Tasha replied evenly. But I'm ready to give my statement. Captain Walsh nodded, taking a seat beside her on the ambulance bumper. Before we do that, I want you to know I've reviewed the initial dashcam footage. It backs up your account of what happened. Something in Tasha's chest loosened slightly. Technology could be unreliable, footage could malfunction or go missing. Having the captain confirm its existence was significant. We've also taken statements from 3 witnesses so far, he continued. Their accounts match yours as well. Thank you for telling me, Tasha said. She looked toward Officer Reynolds in the patrol car. What happens to him now? Administrative leave while Internal Affairs conducts a full investigation. If the evidence supports it, and it certainly seems to be heading that way, he'll face departmental charges that could lead to termination. Captain Walsh lowered his voice. The district attorney will also review the case for possible criminal charges. Tasha nodded slowly. It was more than she had expected. Police departments often closed ranks around their own. The captain seemed to read her thoughts. Look, Ms. Johnson, I know you probably think we protect our own no matter what, and I won't lie to you, that happens too often. But what occurred tonight was inexcusable. The department has been working to improve our community relations, and that means holding officers accountable when they cross the line. He handed her the clipboard. Your formal statement when you're ready. Take your time. As Captain Walsh walked away, Officer Rivera approached with a cup of water. Thought you might need this, she said, offering it to Tasha. Thank you, Tasha said, taking a sip. Her throat was dry from all the talking. Officer Rivera hesitated, then sat down in the spot the captain had vacated. I want you to know not all of us are like Reynolds, she said quietly. Some of us joined the force to actually protect and serve. I know that, Tasha replied. I work with good officers all the time in my practice. She studied Rivera's face. It must be hard seeing a fellow officer disgrace the badge like this. Harder for the community, Rivera said, surprising Tasha with her frankness. Every time an officer abuses their authority, it makes it harder for the rest of us to do our jobs. People stop trusting us. They stop calling us when they need help. She shook her head. Reynolds deserves whatever's coming to him. As they talked, Tasha noticed one of the witnesses, the man who had first started filming the incident, speaking animatedly with a reporter. She could make out the words, slapped her for no reason, and lawyer stood up to him. The story was already spreading. By morning, it would be all over local news, maybe even national. Tasha felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction that the truth would be told, concern about becoming the center of attention, and a deep sense of responsibility. How she handled the next few days would matter. The paramedic returned with discharge papers. You should follow up with your doctor tomorrow, he advised, and take it easy tonight. You might have some delayed symptoms from the trauma. Tasha thanked him and turned her attention to the statement form. She filled it out methodically, detailing everything from the moment she was pulled over to Reynolds' refusal to explain the stop, to the moment he struck her. She included times, direct quotes, and descriptions of his body language and tone. Years of preparing legal documents had taught her to be thorough and precise. As she finished, she noticed the lieutenant who had arrived with Captain Walsh walking toward her, holding a tablet. Ms. Johnson, he said, I'm Lieutenant Patel. I head our Community Relations Division. Captain Walsh asked me to show you something. He handed her the tablet. On it was the dash cam footage from Reynolds' patrol car. Tasha felt a chill as she watched the scene unfold exactly as she remembered it. Her car pulling over, Reynolds approaching with his hand near his weapon, the tense conversation, and then the moment when his arm shot through her window. We're not hiding anything, Lieutenant Patel said. The footage speaks for itself. Tasha handed back the tablet, a lump forming in her throat. There was something powerful about seeing the truth captured like that, irrefutable evidence that she hadn't imagined or exaggerated what happened. What about his body camera? She asked. Lieutenant Patel's expression hardened slightly. Conveniently turned off about 2 minutes before he pulled you over. That's another violation of department policy we'll be addressing. Captain Walsh returned, taking the completed statement from Tasha. Ms. Johnson, you're free to go. We have your contact information for follow-up. A patrol car will escort you home if you'd like. I think I've had enough police escorts for one night, Tasha said with a hint of dry humor. But thank you for the offer. As she stood to leave, Captain Walsh added, the department will be issuing a formal apology tomorrow. I'd like to offer my personal apology now. What happened to you tonight should never happen to anyone. Tasha nodded, accepting his words. Apologies matter, Captain, but actions matter more. I'll be watching how the department handles this case. I'd expect nothing less, he replied. As Tasha walked back to her car, she passed the crowd of onlookers. Several people nodded to her respectfully. An older woman reached out and squeezed her hand in silent support. The news reporter tried to approach her for a comment, but Tasha politely declined. Not tonight, she said. "I'll have more to say tomorrow, after I've had time to process everything." Back, in her car, Tasha finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what had happened, what could have happened, hit her all at once. But along with the fear and anger came a sense of purpose. Tonight had shown her firsthand what many of her clients experienced, and how much work still needed to be done. As she drove home under a sky now lightening with the first hints of dawn, Tasha knew this incident would change the course of her career, her activism, and perhaps the police department itself. Sometimes justice came from unexpected places, even from the painful sting of an open palm against an innocent cheek. 6 weeks had passed since that night at the intersection of Maple and 4th Street. Tasha stood in front of her bathroom mirror, touching the spot on her cheek where the bruise had long since faded. The physical mark was gone. But what had happened? That night had left a permanent impression on her life and on the community. She straightened her blazer and checked her watch. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., and she wanted to arrive early to review her talking points one last time. As she drove downtown, Tasha couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind of events since that traffic stop. The morning after, the incident, the dash cam video had leaked online. By noon, it had over 1 million views. Local news stations ran the story as their lead, and by evening, national outlets had picked it up too. The public reaction had been swift and overwhelming. Hundreds of people had gathered outside police headquarters in peaceful protest. The mayor had issued a statement promising a thorough investigation, and Tasha's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Other victims of police misconduct seeking her help, advocacy groups wanting her support, media requesting interviews. Through it all, Tasha had maintained her focus on what mattered most, turning one act of injustice into meaningful change. She pulled into the parking lot behind City Hall, where a small crowd of reporters was already gathering. Her law partner, David Lynn, was waiting for her at the side entrance. "Ready for this?" he asked, handing her a coffee. "As ready as I'll ever be," Tasha replied, taking a grateful sip. Inside, they made their way to a small conference room where the chief of police, the mayor, and several community leaders were already seated. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, a combination that had become familiar over the past 6 weeks of negotiations. "Tasha," the mayor said, standing to greet her, "we were just reviewing the final agreement. Your revisions have been incorporated." Tasha nodded and took her seat at the table. In front of her lay the document that represented countless hours of work. A comprehensive plan for police reform in the city. It included mandatory de-escalation training, new protocols for traffic stops, an overhauled complaint process, and most importantly, a civilian oversight board with real power to investigate misconduct. "Is everyone comfortable with the language as it stands?" Tasha asked, looking around the table. The police chief, a career officer nearing retirement, nodded slowly. "It's more extensive than what we initially proposed," he admitted. "But after reviewing the data your team presented on complaint patterns, I believe these changes are necessary." One of the community leaders, Pastor Thomas from the Eastside Neighborhood Association, leaned forward. "This wouldn't have happened without you, Tasha. Your willingness to fight not just for yourself but for systemic change has made all the difference." Tasha smiled slightly. "It wasn't just me. It was the witnesses who came forward. The officers who broke ranks to support accountability, the community members who peacefully demanded change, and city leadership willing to listen." She glanced at the mayor. "Change happens when enough people decide the status quo is unacceptable." A staff member poked her head in the door. "The press is ready whenever you are." They gathered their materials and moved toward the city council chambers where rows of press had assembled. Cameras flashed as they took their places at the front of the room. The mayor spoke first, outlining the reforms they were announcing. The police chief followed, acknowledging past failures and committing to a new direction. Then it was Tasha's turn. As she approached the podium, Tasha felt a moment of nerves. Public speaking had never been her favorite part of being an attorney. But she thought about all the people watching, especially those who had experienced similar injustices, but never got their day of reckoning and found her voice. 6 weeks ago, I was driving home from work when I was pulled over for no reason, she began. What followed was an abuse of power that left me with a bruised face and a cracked phone. But today isn't about that isolated incident. It's about addressing the conditions that made it possible. She looked out at the sea of faces. In the aftermath of that night, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual pattern of denial and delay, city leaders and top police officials engaged in genuine dialogue about reform. Instead of being silenced, community voices were amplified. And instead of an incident report being filed away and forgotten, real policy changes were put on the table. Tasha held up the agreement. This document represents a new beginning, not a perfect solution, but a significant step forward in how our community is policed and how power is balanced between law enforcement and the citizens they serve. As she outlined the key points of the reform package, Tasha noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Officer Rivera, who had shown her kindness that night. Their eyes met briefly, and Rivera gave her a small nod of respect. Many have asked about Officer Reynolds, Tasha continued, addressing the question on everyone's mind. Yesterday, the district attorney announced charges against him for assault and civil rights violations. The Internal Affairs investigation has recommended termination. While I take no personal satisfaction in another person's downfall, there must be consequences for abuses of power, especially from those entrusted to protect and serve. She paused, then added something that wasn't in her prepared remarks. I've also learned that Officer Reynolds had a history of complaints that were dismissed or ignored. If those earlier warnings had been taken seriously, perhaps what happened to me could have been prevented. That's why the civilian oversight board included in this agreement is so crucial. After the formal press conference ended, Tasha spent nearly an hour talking with reporters, answering questions about the reforms and her role in shaping them. By the time she finally made it back to her car, she was exhausted, but satisfied. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Check your email, you won't believe who reached out. Tasha opened her email to find a message from the dean of the state university's law school, inviting her to speak to students about the case and the resulting reforms. Another email had come from a national civil rights organization asking if she would consider joining their board. As she scrolled through the messages, a call came in from a number she didn't recognize. Tasha hesitated, then answered. Ms. Johnson? This is Layla Washington. The voice was hesitant, young. I saw you on TV just now. What happened to you happened to my brother last year, but nobody believed him because there weren't any witnesses. I was wondering, could I talk to you about it? Tasha felt a wave of emotion, sadness for what this family had endured, anger at the system that had failed them, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Of course, she said gently. My office is downtown. Can you come in tomorrow morning? After arranging the meeting, Tasha sat in her car for a moment, thinking about how one moment had changed everything. The slap that was meant to put her in her place had instead launched her into a new chapter of her career and life. 2 months later, Tasha stood before a packed audience in the community center's largest room. What had started as a small legal clinic to help victims of police misconduct had grown into something much bigger, the Center for Justice and Accountability, with Tasha as its director and a team of volunteer attorneys handling cases. Our goal isn't just to win individual cases, she explained to the people gathered there, community members, law students, activists, and even a few police officers. It's to change the systems that allow injustice to flourish. On the wall behind her hung framed newspaper headlines from the past few months. One showed Tasha shaking hands with the new police commissioner, the former Lieutenant Patel, promoted after his predecessor retired in the wake of the reforms. Another showed Officer Rivera, now a sergeant, leading a community police training session, and in a small frame in the corner was a photo Tasha kept to remind herself of where it all began, a screenshot from the dash cam video showing her face in the moment after she was struck, shocked but unbroken. Someone once told me that what happened that night would define me, Tasha said to the crowd. They were wrong. What happened after, how we all responded, the changes we fought, For together. That's what defines us as a community. As applause filled the room, Tasha felt a deep sense of gratitude. The path to justice was rarely straight or simple, but sometimes, when courage met opportunity and individual pain was channeled into collective action, real change was possible. Satr. Bruise on her cheek had healed long ago, but its impact would be felt for years to come.